Sup, you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto Was the Son of Kaguya Otsutsuki. If you guys enjoy this What If, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other What Ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. Minato Namikaze was a man not easily scared or unnerved. He'd seen more than enough death and bloodshed during the Third Shinobi War, and he had more blood than he would like on his hands. He'd kept his cool, even after committing one of the most notable actions of his ninja career. And of the Third Shinobi War, his slaughtering of a platoon of Iwa Shinobi and Kunoichi, walking out of the bloodbath with a hard, emotionless face. He had never been nervous or scared then. But as he stood out in the lounge room of his apartment in Konoha, he could feel the kind of nervousness, the kind of anticipation that he had first felt when he knew he was going to get his first taste of real-life combat. His father had finally thrown the tri-pronged kunai that he had given him before he left Konoha over a month ago. Now he stood waiting for Kushina to finish doing whatever it was that she was doing, most likely double-checking that she had everything, before the two of them flashed to his father's location. Both of them had bought formal clothes for the wedding, not being allowed to buy actual wedding clothes without attracting unwanted attention. Minato had bought a black hakama to go with a black kimono that would have a white trimming around the collar. He also had a black haori with white around the cuffs on the sleeves and rim. He had no idea what Kushina had bought, both of them having agreed to keep what they were wearing a secret until they were about to be wed. As he waited for Kushina, Minato thought about the place that his father had thrown his kunai from. He knew that wherever Naruto was, it was towards the northeast, around the land of lightning and the land of frost, closer to Shimigakure village hidden in the frost than to Kumo. This did nothing to quell the nerves and thoughts that betrayed his trust of his father. Is Naruto part of Kumo? His mind said, as it began to doubt all of the trust that Naruto had brought up. Kumo was always interested in Kushina for her lineage. Perhaps they found out that we were dating or even engaged. This could all be some elaborate trap. Naruto is close enough to Kumo that he could be at some sort of hidden base. It might even be Kumo and Iwa joining forces. Kumo found out that Kushina and I were together and decided to ask Iwagakure if they wanted to be part of the trap that caught the yellow flash. Minato snapped himself out of those thoughts. He had no reason to believe that Naruto, his father, was working against him or Konoha. Naruto had his secrets, that much Minato could tell, but so did he. He couldn't expect his father to tell him everything when he wouldn't either. Though whether he wouldn't tell his father his own secrets out of lack of trust or his instincts as a shinobi had yet to be confirmed. He could only hope that Naruto's secrets, whatever they may be, wouldn't endanger his village, because he knew that it would be on his head that the axe fell if that happened. Minato-kun, the sound of Kushina's voice brought Minato out of his inner thoughts. Shaking his head to clear away the lingering thoughts, Minato turned to Kushina, who was clad in her shinobi outfit, just as he was in his. On her side was a sealing scroll, similar to the one that he had at his, holding her clothing. "Yes, Kushina-chan," Minato asked. "What's wrong?" Kushina questioned as she came up to her fiancé, taking a hold of his hand, her voice full of concern. "Your brow is furrowed and you have a slight frown. That only happens when you think of things that trouble you." Her voice then changed from concern to disapproval. "You know that you're not allowed to think of anything negative today. We're going to get married and I won't let it be ruined because you were grumpy, Databane." Minato chuckled at his soon-to-be wife's attitude. "Sorry, Kushina-chan, I promise it won't happen again." Minato moved his arms to encircle the red-headed woman, who allowed herself to be pulled into the blonde's arms. "You better," she mumbled, all her disapproval gone as she was held in her love's arms. "Is this really happening?" she questioned softly after a few moments of silence. "Are we really going to married?" She looked up at Minato, who only smiled at her. "Of course we are," Minato told her, "but I think that we should get going. It's almost 10 o'clock. Tucson might think we're not coming." He told her jokingly. "Haha," she deadpanned. "You do know that if your Tucson packs up the wedding things when we get there, I'm blaming you. Do you want to know the kind of pain I'll give you if you make me miss my wedding?" Kushina asked, the last part being said sweetly. Minato immediately paled, recognizing the tone. "Oh, of course, Kushina-chan," he stuttered slightly. "Let's go." "Much better," Kushina chirped as the both disappeared in a flash of yellow. When Minato reappeared, he felt his body instinctively tense up, his ingrained reactions ignoring his conscious belief that he would come to no harm. His eyes quickly surveyed the room, locating potential enemies, yet finding nothing besides stone walls. A cough from behind drew Minato's attention, causing him to spin around. inadvertently dragging Kushina, who was still in his grip, with a yelp. Instead of the hostile shinobi that his body expected, he found his father, dressed in long black pants and a white kimono, and standing in front of the only entrance to the room. "Welcome," his father said with a smile, perhaps missing his body's natural reaction, though the slight glimmer of sadness in his eyes that Minato managed to catch before it disappeared said otherwise. "Minato, Kushina, you are right on time." "Where are we?" Kushina asked as she moved out of her fiancé's arms and looked around the barren stone room. Minato couldn't help but wonder the same question, call it a gut feeling, but he could sense that they weren't in some uninhabited building that his father had stumbled across, but rather a place that was quite close to black-haired man's heart. "You are in a monastery," Naruto answered, "high on a mountain near the border of Kaminari no Kuni and Shimo no Kuni. This place has been practically abandoned for some time. No one will be able to know that we are here." "What do you mean when you say practically?" Minato questioned. "Is there anyone that comes here?" Minato saw his father gain a sad smile as he responded to his question. "No, I've been the only one to come here for some time." Kushina could hear the sorrow in Naruto's voice that spoke of loss and immediately tried to change the subject. "So Naruto, where are we meant to go?" the Uzumaki said, clapping her hands together as she spoke. The change in subject worked. Naruto's tone became absent of the sadness that had gripped it before. "I assume that you both have your own formal clothes." At Kushina's nod, Naruto continued. "Good, in that case, Minato, you can get changed outside, Kushina. I will wait outside for when you are ready." "Why do I have to get changed outside?" Minato asked as he moved out of the room with his father. It was only once outside and in a long corridor that Naruto spoke. "So that you are prepared for when Kushina arrives," Naruto told him. "If you are outside, you can get changed and then be ready, or would you like Kushina to walk down the aisle and find you not there because you got lost on the way?" "The closest room to this one is in the opposite direction of the altar." Minato whitened at the implication before conceding to Naruto's point. "Good, now remember, walk down the corridor," Naruto said, pointing towards one end of the passageway that they were in. "Then turn right, right again, then left. Once you've done that, follow the corridor, you'll know when you get there." "Okay," Minato nodded, showing he understood. "Right, right, left, then straight." With that, Minato moved to walk down the part of the corridor that his father pointed to when he stopped and turned around. "After the wedding is over, could tell me why this place?" the blonde asked. "You must have a reason for taking us here." Naruto gave Minato a pained smile. "After the wedding, I don't want to ruin your big day." Giving his father a nod in acceptance, Minato moved down the corridor towards his destination. Looking at the walls as he moved through the monastery, Minato took a moment to think about where he was. There were very few abandoned monasteries in the world, especially ones that looked as whole as this one did. Pausing for a moment to study the walls, Minato immediately noticed that the stone didn't look as worn as it should. While not as knowledgeable as his predecessor, the Sandaime, when it came to the history of the elemental nations, Minato knew that it had definitely been a while since any monasteries had been made. Their often isolated positions were replaced with the more modern temples. While not knowing the exact date, Minato was reasonably sure that the most recent monastery that had been built was in Iwagakure roughly a millennium ago. Minato shook his head. This must be one of his father's secrets, one that he would hopefully be privy to after his wedding. Quickly moving the directions that his father had left him with, Minato found himself at the end of a corridor that had several white strips of cloth obscuring what was behind it. Moving forward with some trepidation, he stretched his hand out and moved the cloth to one side. Almost immediately, he was captured by the view. It was perfect. Kushina would love it. Naruto didn't know how long he waited for Kushina to be finished changing into her clothing. It might have been 5 minutes, it might have been 20. He was too busy thinking to truly care. When he had first arrived here, the first thing that he had done was to visit his family, mother and brother included. He had visited his mother and brother first, greeting them with a hello, filling them in on what happened when he met his son and all that his offspring had achieved, along with his engagement with a member of the Uzumaki clan. It had all been normal, but when he went to visit the grave of his wife, his gaze then fell on spot that Konan's grave occupied, or should it be possible grave. With the revelation that Minato had lived through the encounter with the ninja from the Land of Sky, Naruto's mind immediately began to wonder if Konan had done the same. While Konan didn't have what he suspected Minato of having, there was still the possibility that she had, by some miracle, survived the Skynin's assault. As he began to think about, before the grave of Minami, one single inconstancy rose to the forefront of his mind. The burns, the ones that had been along the trees, seemed too numerous. While Minami had been fit for a civilian, she had nowhere near the physical endurance of ninja. As painful as it was to think about, the ninja should have been able to slip behind Minami and slit her throat without issue, along with that of Minato and Konan, so why had jutsu been used? As he thought about it, Minato could only come to one conclusion: someone else had been in that clearing, another ninja, one that he had missed when he had spread out his senses to search for Minato and Konan. They must have encountered Minami when she was fleeing from the Skynin. They had a short fight with the other ninja, before Minami was hit with the explosive tag that was attached to the kunai. There was still a chance that Konan had been incinerated within the explosion that had also claimed her mother. But there was also a chance, a small one, that the shinobi may have taken Konan for whatever reason. Whether he thought she had potential to become a powerful ninja for their village, or for some other sick reason that Naruto refused to think about, there was still the chance that she was alive. Unfortunately, like Minato, it was almost impossible to tell where she was. Too long had passed since she was taken. She could be anywhere in the elemental nations and beyond. He could only pray that, like Minato, he might hear of her doing some sort of notable deed. Naruto, Kushina broke Naruto from his thoughts as she exited the room. I'm done. The redhead was wearing pure white kimono that went down to her feet and was lined with sky blue. Her hair was flowing freely down her back, and a sky blue cloth closed her kimono. All in all, she looked like the perfect bride for his son. You look amazing, Kushina, Naruto told her with a smile on his face. Kushina blushed at the compliment. Like a princess? Thank you, Naruto. It means a lot to hear you say that, Kushina replied truthfully. Naruto then motioned with his hand towards one end of the corridor that the room exited to. Let's go, Minato is waiting for us at the altar, Naruto said, but before they could move, Kushina interjected. Oh, she exclaimed, I almost forgot. What about Minato-kun's kunai and the ceiling scroll containing my other clothes? She asked, motioning back to the room. Naruto merely waved her off. Don't worry, it will be there when you get back. For now, just focus on the wedding. Naruto's words seemed to bring up a slight panic in Kushina before she took a deep breath to steady herself. Okay, she said, let's go. With that, both Kushina and Naruto began to move down the hall towards Minato, but Naruto immediately noticed that Kushina kept taking sneaking glances at him and seemed to be saddened by something. It was only when they reached the end of the corridor, about to take the first right, that Naruto stopped. What's wrong, Kushina? He asked the Uzumaki. Kushina seemed to realize that she'd been caught but tried to downplay it. Nothing's wrong, Kushina said, lying convincingly. No, something is wrong, Naruto pushed, hoping Kushina would tell him what. You can tell me anything, Kushina. After today, we'll be family after all. Naruto's pleading seemed to break through whatever resistance that Kushina tried to put up. She slumped before speaking. Remember when I told you that I wanted a wedding ceremony? Kushina asked him. Naruto nodded before he remembered the other part of what she had said to him. You want your Tucson here to walk you down the aisle, don't you? Naruto said softly, getting a nod from the Uzumaki woman. Kushina, if you had said that you wanted your Tucson here. No, that's not it, Kushina interrupted before she shook her head and spoke again. Well, partly, the redhead released a sigh before she continued. My Tucson died a long time ago, and while that's partly why I'm sad, it's not the complete reason. At the beginning of the Third Shinobi War, my Ka-san, the leader of Uzushiagakure, sent me to Konoha to keep me safe. Kushina spat out the last word like it was a foul poison. She sent there as a young girl when I knew no one. I was 13, and she took me away from my family and dumped me in some place that I'd never been to before. The fact that I was teased almost instantly for my red hair didn't help. Kushina paused to sniff a bit before continuing. I idolized my Ka-san growing up. She was the leader of a village, how could I not? But she ripped me from her and pushed me out on my own. I cried, I begged, and I pleaded for her to take me back. I sent letters to her, telling her how people teased me, but she sent nothing back. The Uzumaki woman lowered her head to the ground and didn't say anything more after that. You resent your Ka-san for splitting up your family and sending you away, Naruto concluded softly. But now you wish that she was here for your wedding, don't you? To see her smiling at you as you walked down the aisle. Yes, the answer came out as a croak, Kushina obviously struggling to hold back tears. Naruto released a sigh before speaking. It is too late for her to be able to come here, Naruto told her. This obviously did nothing to help console woman in any way, but it is not too late for your Ka-san to be able to be a part of your life once more. Talk to her, reconnect with her. What you're holding on to happened a long time ago. You must move past it if you are to ever be able to look your Ka-san in the eye. The words of the black-haired man seemed to help the redhead slightly. Kushina looked up, tears gathering in her eyes. Do you think it'll work? She sniffed. Only if you try, Naruto replied, but that is for another day. Today you're getting married, it is a time for celebration, not sorrow. He smiled, causing Kushina to do the same. The Uzumaki gave a small smile and wiped her eyes of the gathering tears. You're right, she said to Naruto. I got angry at Minato-kun for doing the same thing. I guess that makes me a bit of a hypocrite. I'm sure that Minato won't ever have to know, Naruto said to her with small wink, getting a chuckle out of the woman. Thank you, Naruto, Kushina told Minato's father. Thank you, I needed that. It's fine, Naruto said to the redhead, but I believe that we have a wedding to go to. Yes, Kushina said, we do. With that, the two continued on their way through the monastery in a comfortable silence. The rest of the turns were made without comment, and before either knew it, they were standing in front of the white strips of cloth that blocked the garden from view. Naruto turned to Kushina and offered his elbow hesitantly. I know that I'll never be your Tucson, Kushina, he began, but would you allow me to give you away? The woman's eyes widened at the question before she took his elbow with a smile. I would love it if you would, Naruto. Kushina accepted the elbow, lacing her own arm through it before they both moved forward to the cloth. Naruto reached forward and used his hand to push the cloth to the side to allow Kushina through. When she did, she took one look at the surroundings and gasped. Sakura blossoms towered overhead. The bright pink trees seemed to let down a constant shower of their petals, covering the ground in a pink glaze. The sun shined through the canopy, casting rays of light down on certain spots of the monastery's garden. With her trained eyesight, Kushina managed to spot several birds perched in the trees, each one seemingly a different color from the last, making the branches of the sakura blossoms alight with colors. Several meters from the bride-to-be was a pond. Several koi fish swam around in the water, all of them different colors, much like the birds. Just in front of the pond was what made Kushina the happiest. It was her soon-to-be husband. He looked so handsome. Minato was standing on a white platform with stairs leading up to the stand. A white arch was also on the platform, resting just behind him. Kushina didn't even realize that she had started walking again until she began to take the steps up to the podium. She was too focused on the man standing on the podium. The one with the spiky yellow hair, blue eyes, and the stupidest grin on his face that she had ever seen, the one that she was going to spend the rest of her life with. You look beautiful, Minato complimented as soon as she made it onto the platform, taking her hand in his as she detached herself from Naruto's elbow. So do you, she replied as she continued to stare into his eyes. He did the same. Neither noticed Naruto move around to the other side of the platform, with his back to the small pond. Giving the two a few seconds to snap out of their daze, Naruto was finally forced to cough rather loudly before they turned their attention to him. Should I do the quick version? Naruto asked, amused at the behavior between the two. He didn't know if he'd ever met a more in-love couple than his son and Kushina, or the regular one. They both blushed red. The regular version, Minato managed to say after he managed to get his complexion under control. The wedding proceeded normally after that. Naruto read out the lines that he'd rehearsed during his time at the monastery, waiting for the right time to call Minato and Kushina. He spoke for over an hour, reciting the same words that a priest from the fire temple would have, not stumbling or stuttering, speaking as if he'd said the same words for years instead of days. At some point during his speaking, Kushina and Minato had returned to staring at each other, but Naruto made no movement to interrupt. He had a feeling that this wasn't the same situation that happened before. The blonde and redhead held each other's hands, neither making any movement to pull away. Eventually, Naruto finally made his way to the end of his ceremonial speech, reaching the part that required the would-be husband and wife to answer a question. Minato Namikaze, Naruto spoke, do you swear to love Kushina Uzumaki for the rest of your mortal life and beyond? Do you swear to support her, to nurture her when she can't? To be there for her for the rest of your days? Yes, was Naruto's response. With Minato's answer, Naruto then asked Kushina, Kushina Uzumaki, do you swear to love Minato Namikaze for the rest of your mortal life and beyond? Do you swear to support him, to nurture him when he can't, to be there for him for the rest of your days? Naruto recited, already knowing what her answer was, just like he knew what Minato's would be. Yes, she answered. Then with these words as your oath, I pronounce you husband and wife, Naruto announced joyously. As if she had been restrained by some sort of invisible barrier, Kushina leapt at Minato, grabbing him by the collar of his garb and pulling him down to allow her to smash her lips against his in a passionate kiss. Minato offered no resistance, his arms wrapping around Kushina's waist, holding her against him as the two shared their first kiss as husband and wife. Naruto watched them with a smile, He brought him immense joy to be able to see his son so happy, seemingly so complete with Kushina in his arms. With one final glance at the happy couple, he decided that he had seen enough, and moved away to give the newly created family some privacy. Neither would know how much Naruto altered the garden to suit their wedding, rearranging something that had reminded him of a better time. Naruto hoped he would never have to tell them of how little he recognized this garden, of how little he recognized something that reminded him of his childhood. Naruto didn't know how long he'd been standing in front of the bamboo tree that acted as the grave marker for his brother's final resting place. He didn't know how much time had passed. He didn't know if his son and his wife were still in the front part of the garden, expressing their love for each other, or if they were even in the garden at all. He knew that altering the garden of this monastery, the place he had truly called home for countless years, was the right thing to do for Minato. Perhaps not something he would have wanted with all his being, but nevertheless he wanted his son happy, and if altering the garden would make him happy, then he would do it. It was the least he could do for not being beside him for so long. Naruto knew that Minato might feel like it wasn't his fault, but Naruto knew it was. He shouldn't have believed that Minato and Konan's bodies were incinerated without seeing some sort of proof, a burnt piece of cloth, blood, a burnt limb, anything. He shouldn't have taken what he saw at face value. Perhaps it was his age that made him sloppy, perhaps he was blinded by the knowledge that Minami was dead. Whatever the case, Naruto had failed. Now he had a son who was a grown man, and possibly still a live daughter who was now a grown woman, growing up who knows where. Much like the other times when he felt this kind of belief that he had failed at something, that he had not taken the best course of action, he tried to imagine what his brother would have said. Naruto may be the oldest biological being on the planet, but he knew, with doubt, that Hagoromo would still have him beat in wisdom, at least 99% of the time. The first son of Kaguya Otsutsuki had always known what to say when it came to making his younger brother feel better. But as of late, Naruto found that trying to think of what his brother would say became harder and more difficult. The situations became more personal, and with the distance of time between the splitting of their family and the few hours that Naruto had been with him before Hagoromo died, Naruto knew little about how his brother had changed personally over the years. His personal beliefs had remained the same, that much Naruto knew, but how would Hagoromo take him changing the garden that they had grown up in for his son and his now wife? How would Hagoromo take the knowledge that he had wiped out an entire city of people, of women, children and innocents, because his family had been killed by one of their members? Naruto couldn't think of anything that Hagoromo would say. He didn't know if the Rinnegan user would condemn him for the murder of the Land of Sky or agree that he had taken down a possible menace to the world. He still didn't know who the one was who spoke to the leader of the Sky Ninja. With these more personal questions, Naruto had a hard time thinking about what his brother would say, his lack of knowledge about Hagoromo Ōtsutsuki becoming prominent. Naruto didn't know how long he stood there, staring at that bamboo plant, occasionally looking at small purple plant that laid to the side. The plant was tiny when compared to the towering bamboo tree a short distance from it. The plant itself was known to botanists, herbalists, and many others who had an in-depth knowledge of plant life. As the butterfly orchid, due to the fact that many times when the plant bloomed, its petals were symmetrical, much like a butterfly's wings. The plant was known to have the ability to calm the mind if grounded into a paste and swallowed, along to help soothe serious burns, though it did nothing to help them heal. It also served as the grave marker for Naruto's second wife. She had always liked the small rare plant. Its rare symmetrical petals had always interested her. Naruto didn't even notice that he had company until the hand on his shoulder alerted him to that fact. Thankfully, before his body could lash out, his mind reminded it that they weren't the only people to be in the monastery. So instead of spinning around with a fist ready to take someone's head off, Naruto merely spun around, arms by his side tensing only slightly. It was Minato with Kushina by his side, their hands interlocked. "Tucson," Minato began before anything else was said. His voice was completely serious, but a smile was on his face. "Thank you for what you have done for us today. Neither Kushina nor myself can say anything that will be able to express our gratitude for setting all this up. You made my dream come true," Kushina continued, a similar smile on her face. "You went above and beyond what I had imagined. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Naruto." Naruto couldn't help a small smile come to his face at the expressions of Minato and Kushina. It wasn't their expressions of thankfulness that he could easily make out, but it was the pure happiness that he could sense just underneath that. "Neither of you owe me anything," Naruto told the newlyweds. "Least of all you, Minato. Naruto's son merely shook his head at his father's words. "Tucson, you searched for me when you heard I was alive. That makes any kind of debt you feel is between us repaid. You came looking for me when you could have continued to live out your life as if I didn't exist," the blonde explained. "I never could have ignored a sign that you were alive," Naruto said, shaking his head. "You, your Kasan and sister made up my whole world when we were together as a family. It would disrespect everything that I had with Minami if I didn't at least look into a whisper that said to me that you were alive. And that is why there will never be any kind of debt between us," Minato replied with a smile. "You proved that you truly loved me like a parent would a child, and that's all I need." Naruto didn't reply to Minato's words, instead turning around, back to the bamboo plant with a sigh. After a few moments, Minato walked up beside him. "Who's buried here?" Minato questioned softly. Naruto cast his son a sideward glance before he turned back to his brother's tree. "How could you tell?" Naruto said, asking his own question. "I've seen Kakashi give the memorial stone back at Konoha a similar glance to know that look," Minato responded. "But you didn't answer my question, who's buried here?" Minato repeated. Naruto released another sigh before going silent, opening his mouth after a few moments. "My brother," Naruto answered softly. He noticed Minato tensed up slightly at the notion that he had more dead family, his hand twitching. "He is buried beneath the bamboo tree." Naruto once again fell silent before speaking again a short time later. "As for who is under the butterfly orchid, that would be your Kasan." This time he saw Minato visibly tense, his back straightening, his eyes widening while his breath hitched. "She always had a fascination with the butterfly orchid," Naruto continued, as if Minato wasn't reacting as he was. "The color and symmetry would capture her attention for hours if she had nothing better to do." Looking over to his son, Naruto motioned to the grave. "Talk to her," he said. "She would love to hear how you've been doing over the years." Minato looked over to his father before turning to look at his mother's resting place. He felt Kushina come up behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders and her head at the back of his neck. The blonde rubbed his hands over her own as he kept looking at the grave. "Speak to her," Kushina whispered in his ear. "It's all right, Minato, I'll be here." Taking a calming breath, Minato walked forward slightly, Kushina doing the same as her hands slid down till they were around Minato's waist. "Hi, Ka-san," Minato started before falling silent. Naruto gave his son an encouraging look when he turned to look at him. "It's me, Minato. I wanted to say thank you for what you've done for me." Minato swallowed. "Tucson, he told me that you sacrificed yourself for me, gave me time to escape. I might not have ever met you, at least not in any way I can remember, but I just wanted to let you know that I'll always think of you as my Ka-san." Minato stopped speaking to suppress some of the tears that began to form. Minto then stepped to the side and brought Kushina around so that she was standing beside him with Minato's arm wrapped around her waist. "This is Kushina," Minato continued after managing to center himself a bit more. "She and I just got married. Tucson organized everything." Minato paused, thinking of what to say before resuming. "Tucson found me not too long ago. I didn't believe him right away when he said that he was related to me." Minato's voice then turned a bit sheepish. "I almost had him thrown in cell. But I managed to convince him that I was," Naruto said, speaking to the grave of his deceased wife alongside his son. "We had a hugging reunion and everything." Naruto told the heir with a chuckle. All was silent for a while as no one spoke. That was until Kushina decided that she had something to say. "Minami-san," the Uzumaki said to the grave, causing the father and son to look over at her. "I just want to let you know that Minato had grown up to be a fine man. He's the leader of our village that has thousands of people living in it." Kushina then turned to her husband with a smile that was mirrored on his face. "It's a position of responsibility and honor, something that Minato-kun has in spades." She turned back to the grave. "You would be proud of the person your son has grown into." "That you would, Minami," Naruto said lowly, "be loud enough for the other two occupants of the garden to hear." "That you would." This time the silence was for longer, everyone having said their piece to the grave of Minami. The garden was silent, not bushes rustling, nor birds spoke their calls, almost as if the monastery was giving the three people in the makeshift graveyard a silent time to mourn what could have been. "What is this place, Tucson?" Minato asked after several moments, turning to look at his father, Kushina doing the same. "What is this place to you?" "This place," Naruto began after a breath, "is where I grew up. This place is my home, this place." Naruto trailed off. He didn't turn to see his son or daughter-in-law's face. It was most likely that of mild shock. After all, when could they have ever expected that he would have been raised in a place such as this, seemingly isolated from the rest of the world? "I grew up here with my Kasan and my brother," Naruto continued. Here, Kasan taught us everything she thought that we would need in order to survive the world. I'm going to guess that she is. Minato's question trailed off, though anyone would have been able to know in which direction that question was heading in. Yes, Minato, Naruto said, answering the unfinished question. My Kasan has passed as well. Naruto then gestured to a tree over the left side of the graves they were currently standing at. The tree itself was large and twisting, the trunk seemingly trying to wrap around itself as it stretched upwards. The branches of the tree spread out like arms, trying to touch the entire garden and casting a shadow over everything underneath it in the midday sun. The leaves were a forest green, the bark a light gray. Thick roots gripped the ground, absorbing nutrients from deep within the earth. She is buried underneath that tree, much like my brother and Minami are under their own. A tombstone would detract from the beauty of this place, and that is something that I know that they wouldn't want to happen, Naruto continued. What were their names? Minato asked as he looked at the great tree his grandmother was buried under. Naruto hesitated for several moments, contemplating telling his son a lie or the truth. Neither Hagoromo nor Kaguya were common names, nor had they ever really been so, seeing as they were both clan names. But then again, no one really knew the legend of the Sage of Six Paths anymore, never mind his real name or his mother's. Hagoromo, Naruto answered, was my brother's name. My Kasan's name was Kaguya. Minato made no move to speak to his uncle and grandmother like he had his own mother. He instead let his gaze linger on the two graves as his mind linked the names to the graves. Much like before, a silence lingered, this time broken by Naruto. I think that's enough for one day, Naruto said to Minato and Kushina. He allowed a smile to make its way to his face. Now I think it's time to cut the cake. Naruto almost laughed at the smile that Kushina gained when he said the name of the desert. Minato gained a similar smile, but it seemed more subdued than his wife's, not as happy or exited. Last time I checked, Tucson, you didn't have any cake, Minato said, pointing out the supposed flaw in Naruto's words. Kushina then elbowed him with a bit of force if his small yelp was anything to go by. Don't be rude, Kushina scolded the grown man. If Naruto says he has cake, then I believe him. Why would he lie about having cake? Naruto let a chuckle come from his mouth. It's all right, Kushina, Minato most likely hasn't figured it out yet, Naruto told her. He then gave his son a look that said figure it out. Minato's face formed a frown of concentration as he thought over his father's words before it clicked into place. When it did, he chuckled. So that's why it took longer than it should have to get to the garden, Minato said. I passed the room but not the entrance. Minato felt that it was strange for the monastery to not have a room closer to the garden. He had actually passed the room as he went to garden from the room he and Kushina had arrived in. Correct, Naruto said with a smile. Now shall we go to the cake? It was a question, but Naruto was already moving and Minato and Kushina followed, the blonde's hand still around the waist of his wife. The duo followed Naruto back through the garden, past the sakura blossoms where their wedding took place, and back into the monastery. This time, however, instead of going right and going back the way they came, Naruto took a left, prompting Minato and Kushina to follow. A right turn later and group was standing on front of a room with a small dining table seated for two people, fine plates and silver cutlery. A dish cover preventing the meals underneath being seen while keeping them warm. An unlit candlestick was at the center with twin wine glasses for the bottle of wine that was placed at one end. Beside the dining table was another table. This one was smaller than the other, with a cake sitting on the surface. White icing decorated most of the cake with 4 small columns holding up another small layer of cake, on which were 2 small figurines. One was obviously male by the garb, the other female. The toys seemed to be in mid-kiss on top of the cake, with the blonde, the male one, having its hand wrapped around the waist of the red-headed one, the female. Minato chuckled as he looked at the 2 figurines at the top of the cake. I'm not going to ask, he told his father, who gave his own chuckle. Minato took another look at the setup and frowned. There are only 2 seats and the table it's set for 2. He stated to his father, where will you sit? I'm not sitting, Minato, Naruto said to his son. Before Minato could question why, Naruto was already speaking. Remember, this is your wedding day. You and Kushina come first today, not me, he explained. So sit, eat, enjoy, because you will have to go back to Konoha soon. With that, Naruto began to walk to the exit, but a question from Kushina stopped him from leaving. What do you mean soon? We have plenty of time, Kushina said, but Naruto turned with a smile that spoke of amusement. While it may seem like not a lot of time has passed, Kushina, that is because we are high up on a mountain and above the clouds. Because of this, we get more time in the sun, Naruto explained. I can assure you that it is almost 3 o'clock. At the realization of the time, Kushina spluttered a bit while Minato's eyes went wide slightly. What? Kushina asked in shock, but it should be midday, she exclaimed. Oh, by what count? Naruto told her. When you first got here, it was about 10 in Konoha. You took about an hour to get changed, Kushina. The wedding itself went for around an hour and a half, and we were then at the graves for half an hour, Naruto explained. But that leaves 2 hours unaccounted for, Minato protested. I believe that's what happens when the wedding kiss turns into the wedding see who can suck the other's mouth off first contest, Naruto said with a deadpan. Minato's cheeks turned pink while Kushina made the reason known why she was called Tomato. Naruto let loose a laugh as he looked at the reactions of the two newlyweds. Now I'm going to give the two of you some privacy. Enjoy your dinner. Dinner, Minato echoed. But you said that it was 3. Why would we have dinner so early? Minato asked. When do you think you'll get to have a romantic wedding dinner at Konoha? Naruto answered with a question of his own. With the conversation over, Naruto made his way to the doorway, but just as he made his way to entrance, he stopped and turned around. Oh, one last thing, he said to the couple who looked like they were just about to move to their dinner. His voice then turned teasing. Easy on the wine, I didn't bring an extra futon for any extracurricular activities. He left the room after parting with those words. A small smile played on his face. He was several meters away before a voice rang out, echoing off the monastery's walls. Tucson. It was Minato, but for a second Naruto felt a flashback to a different time, one where instead of his caller being a blonde adult, it was a red-headed boy with violet, ringed eyes that chased him around a very different garden. For a moment, Naruto froze as the memories took him, as they played out in his mind, before his own laughter back to echo off the halls of monastery. It seems he still had it, even after all these years. It would be later that day that Kushina and Minato would return to their lives in Konoha. The majority of the population completely ignorant that of their leader's change in marital status. Those who were in the know would be told over the next week, each one offering their congratulations to couple and express their happiness to them. Kakashi Hatake was one of those people, of those trusted with information that could bring about the downfall of the Hokage. It made him incredibly honored to be trusted with such information even though he was only 13, an age that most would say would be too young for such secrets. He was incredibly grateful for his teacher to have not listened to those who said that he was too young. It not only showed his faith in his abilities and skills as a ninja, but also in his maturity as a person. Like with those who had been told, Kakashi had told Minato of how happy he was for him and Kushina, but also of where and how it happened. Minato had merely given him a conspiratorial wink and told him that he had outside help. The artificial Sharingan user's mind had immediately gone to the black-haired man, Naruto, the one who claimed to be the father of the Yondoime. It appeared that he may have been wrong about the man. He had been suspicious of him and his story ever since he had first arrived in the village. But he had given Kushina and Minato their own wedding somehow when he could have left with that information and sold it to the highest bidder in Iwa. But even if Kakashi accepted the fact that the man was telling the truth about his relation to the current Hokage, there were still things that didn't add up in his story. Like how a civilian had been able to take down several ninja at once, even if he was supposedly trained and underestimated. It would require the kind of training that a civilian simply wouldn't be able to put the effort into unless they didn't require a job or had a source of income that required little work. The fighting style that Naruto would have had to employ as well would have had to have been something of quality, not something that a civilian could find in some self-guide to fighting or even a fighting instructor. It would have to be something that had been improved upon multiple times, tested in fights. Not something that civilian would be able to get their hands on easily. Shinobi and kunoichi were very protective of their skills, no matter where they came from. There was also the lack of a name for the place that the shinobi hailed from. Kakashi highly doubted that anyone who had their family killed in cold blood would simply leave it at that and not find out who did it. He had voiced these concerns to Minato, but the man had waved him off, stating that he knew about them but was waiting for Naruto to come clean. He had pushed Minato for why he was leaving this alone, but Minato had merely stated that everyone has their secrets. Kakashi left the topic of Naruto alone after promising his sensei that he wouldn't pry or actively seek to uncover the man's secrets. Now, a month later, Kakashi was going to something he always did when had the chance. Something he did when he wasn't out on a mission or when he wasn't already doing something that would occupy his time. Something he did whenever he felt himself get that little bit too happy, visit his failures. The only choice he had was whether to visit the one at the Konoha Cemetery or the Memorial Stone. Either one would work. The decision only hinged on which one he felt particularly guilty about today. A few moments of contemplation and Kakashi began to make his way to the Memorial Stone. He knew that if any of his friends, Guy in particular, had seen him in this mood, his eyes, or eye a little more unfocused than usual, his posture seemingly slumped, they would have known immediately where he was going and would have tried to steer him away from his course. That, however, wasn't going to happen today. Guy was away training somewhere around Konoha, and Asuma was probably hanging around with Kurenai. There was always the chance of his sensei being around, but the likelihood of that was low. Being Hokage wasn't a position that allowed for one to have much free time, though that had never stopped his teacher before. As he walked through the streets, Kakashi contemplated getting some flowers for the grave of his Uchiha friend but decided against it. He was just going to visit for a bit being a few hours. However, Kakashi's plans of visiting his friend's resting place was dashed almost as soon as it had begun. "Ah, Kakashi-san, I was looking for you." The voice was one that, while he wasn't familiar with it, he was able to attach a face to it a few moments after hearing it. "Naruto-san," Kakashi gave his usual lazy response as he turned around to face the man. "You know, you could just call me Kakashi like everyone else in the village." "Only if you do the same for me," was the reply from the black-haired man. Naruto was wearing the same brown clothes the last time Kakashi had seen him. He wondered if that was the only set of clothes that Naruto had. Granted, he had only seen the man twice, but still. Shinobi usually wore the same clothes for different reasons, but civilians would usually dress differently every day. "Sure, Naruto, so why were you looking for me?" the teen questioned the elder. "You're going to visit your friend's grave." There was no question involved. Naruto was stating a fact. Kakashi's eyes sharpened as he took in the man before him. "Minato-sensei told you," much like the words spoken before Kakashi's, there was no question. "Yes, he told me about how he and a lot of other people are worried about you." Naruto then released a breath through his nose. "He wants me to talk to you, believes that I can help you, though I don't know why." Naruto's disbelief at the Hokage's request of him was almost as big as Kakashi's. "Well, if that's all." Kakashi turned to move through the streets again, this time quicker than before to lose the civilian, but a hand landing on his shoulder prevented him. While he considered whether or not he should just yank his shoulder out of the elder man's grip, Naruto's voice spoke up from behind him. "Actually, I was going to ask if I could go with you." That stopped Kakashi short, and a small frown formed on his face as he, once again, turned around to face the man. Most people, when they tried to help him, would always try to steer him away from the memorial. Kakashi thought for several moments about what Naruto was asking. There was no rule against civilians from visiting the Shinobi Memorial, so even if he did decline the man's request, he could just ask for directions. Though then again, he did want privacy when he visited the memorial and allowed his guilt to overwhelm him. It wasn't something that he wanted the entirety of Konoha to know about. But the memorial wasn't private and couldn't be reserved unless for a special occasion. "If you want," Kakashi said slowly, finally agreeing, "you can come." "Thank you," Naruto said, giving a small bow of the head as a show of thanks. "Do you wish to lead the way?" he said, gesturing down the road. Without another word, Kakashi moved off, heading towards the memorial stone with Naruto trailing behind him. Moving through the crowd, Kakashi thought about what kind of angle Naruto was going to try and play. He was certain that the man was going to talk to him, to try to help him move past the guilt he felt over the deaths of Rin and Obito, but he was destined to fail, just like all the rest who had tried. Was Naruto going to give an attempt at tough love, yell at him that it wasn't his fault, that it was war, that he should get over it? That had been Kurenai's angle when she tried to rid him of the guilt, tired of his moping. Would he appear sympathetic, to appear to know what he was going to, much like Asuma had tried to do before Kakashi had ruthlessly shot him down, asking if he had lost anyone as close to him as he had Rin and Obito? He hadn't spoken to Asuma for a month, and even now talk between them was strained. A part of Kakashi hoped and pleaded that Naruto gave him an opening to annoy the man. Perhaps if he did it enough, he could spend the rest of his time around the memorial alone. How he liked it! Within a few minutes, the duo arrived at the third training ground, the home of the memorial stone. The dark, kunai-shaped monument to the fallen ninja of Konoha gleamed in the midday sun. Etched onto the marble surface were the names of various ninja that had given their lives for the continued protection of their family and the village they dwelled in. As soon as they entered the clearing, Kakashi immediately walked up to the memorial stone and came to a stop in front of it. He internally waited for Naruto to approach him, to begin speaking, but all the man did walk up beside him and began to look at the stone just as he was. Kakashi still waited for the man to open his mouth, but he never did, content to simply stare at the stone and reflect just as he was. It was only after several minutes of fruitless waiting did Kakashi fully turn his attention to the stone, Naruto having shown that he wasn't going to talk. The two stood there for 10 minutes, which turned to 20, then 40, till finally an hour had passed, and yet even then the two remained still. That hour turned into 2 and then 3. It was on the third hour that the silence was broken, but not by Naruto, but by Kakashi. The teen releasing a sigh that broke the barrier of silence that had stood for so long, he then turned to Naruto, who was still looking at the memorial stone. "What do you want, Naruto?" Kakashi asked bluntly. Naruto didn't answer for a minute, after which he turned and spoke. "What do you mean, Kakashi? I mean, why are you still here? You could have left after the first or second hour, but you stayed here for 3 hours. That's something I do when I feel particularly guilty. So I'll ask again, what do you want?" Kakashi said as his visible eye narrowed. This had gone on for too long. Naruto had been here for too long. He had wanted to feel guilty by himself, not with company. "And what makes you think I don't feel particularly guilty today, Kakashi?" Naruto asked. When Kakashi didn't answer, Naruto continued. "You forget, Kakashi, that like you, I too have lost someone. Where you lost your teammates, I lost my wife, and I will forever hold that as one of my biggest failures, much like I know that you will do the same with the situation with your comrades." Naruto then turned back to the stone, still speaking. "I know that it seems like you can't move on." "That's because I can't," Kakashi interrupted, his voice rising as he spoke. "I can't move on because everything reminds me of them. I see Obito at the training grounds, I see Rin at the academy. I see them both around every single street, just around the corner, except when I get there they aren't there." Kakashi was now yelling at Naruto. His voice would be able to be heard by anyone near the third training ground, if there was anyone. Kakashi closed his single visible eye and released a breath before opening it back up again. When he spoke, his voice was significantly lower, though it slowly began to build up again. "None of my friends know what I'm going through, they simply tell me to get over it, but I can't. Minato-sensei doesn't either, as much as he would like to think so, they didn't die in front of him. You don't know, if anyone knows what you're going through, it's me, so I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you." Naruto snapped, turning to look at the gray-haired teen with anger on his face. "You are acting like a child, throwing a tantrum for attention. You are not the only one in the world to have lost someone." The amount of fury in Naruto's voice surprised Kakashi, but the look in Naruto's eyes made him freeze. He saw the man's green eyes pulse. Where they were once a normal color, they were now a brilliant emerald that blazed with power and anger. It was there for a full moment before the color was repressed, and Naruto's eyes were once again their normal color. "You forget, Kakashi," Naruto's voice made Kakashi focus back on the present. There was anger in his voice, but it was slowly fading. "That for almost 2 decades, I thought that my son was dead, along with my wife and daughter. For almost 2 decades, I practically wallowed in grief, surviving, not living. I have lived with the knowledge that I was the reason that my family died, because I wasn't strong enough to protect them, not aware enough to see that they were in danger. It was only when I got Minato back, and I was telling him about his Kasan, that I realized something. My wife wouldn't have wanted that life for me. She wouldn't have wanted me to let my grief consume me. No, she would have wanted me to live on, to make sure I made the best out of life for the both of us. Perhaps," Naruto continued, "if I had done that, I wouldn't have had to wait so long to be reunited by my son. Perhaps my travels may have taken me to Konoha, and I would have seen that little blonde-haired boy running around and realized that that's my son. Do you understand what I'm trying to say, Kakashi?" Naruto asked. Kakashi was silent for several minutes, both thinking over Naruto's words and what he had seen. Normal eyes didn't do that, Kakashi knew that much, unless one had a doujutsu, which Naruto didn't, and neither did Minato. Naruto didn't come from a ninja clan. Kakashi might not be as good as a sensor nin, but he was able to tell that Naruto had about as much chakra as a genin, the amount that a one should have by his age if they only dabbled in the chakra arts. Naruto's eye change wasn't a trick of the light, Kakashi saw that much. But he also wasn't going to lift up his headband to take a look at Naruto with Obito's Sharingan. That would be breaking his promise to his teacher, a deliberate action to uncover Naruto's secrets. If his eyes weren't part of those secrets, Kakashi would eat his face mask. As to Naruto's words, Kakashi didn't really know what to think. Naruto hadn't actually said to move on or anything of the sort, but Kakashi got the feeling that he was meant to imply that with his words. The words from the dark-haired man had been different than the others that had been given to him from others. The main difference between them being he didn't understand what he being told. On one hand, he never heard the man say to move on, yet on the other, Kakashi felt that it was strongly implied. But on a third hand, Kakashi felt that Naruto was trying to say that he was meant to find some sort of middle ground. "No, I don't. What are you trying to say?" Kakashi told the man. Naruto gave a sigh. "I'm saying that you need to do what Rin and Obito would want you to do." When Kakashi looked like he was going to talk, Naruto spoke first. "Would they want you to stay here mourning over them, or make sure that something like this wouldn't happen again? You don't have to forget about them, Kakashi, merely to forgive yourself. Accept that it was your fault if you must, but your constant grieving is only insulting their memory. Live your life, Kakashi, for yourself, Obito and Rin. Don't waste away." Naruto looked to the memorial stone before turning back. "It is up to you, Kakashi, to choose what you want to do with your life. Just remember that you're not alone." Naruto then turned away and moved to exit the clearing, leaving Kakashi to his thoughts while the single-eyed teen gazed at the retreating man's back. "I don't know what to do," Kakashi spoke at last before Naruto had left the clearing. The words of the adolescent caused Naruto to stop. "I'm the last of my team," Kakashi continued. "Minato-sensei is Hokage and is constantly occupied with other work. I can't go to him for all my problems. Team 7 is disbanded. What am I to do?" Naruto didn't answer Kakashi, nor did he turn around. The young teen was, at first, put out, hoping the man could solve his problems, but before he could turn back to the kunai-shaped memorial, Naruto finally answered. "You are lacking an immediate purpose, Kakashi," Naruto said as he turned around. "Before your team was disbanded, your purpose was clear: protect your teammates, listen to your sensei, accomplish your mission. That was what you have known, but now, you need to find a new reason to get up in the morning, and only you can find it. Accomplish the mission clearly isn't enough for you anymore. It must be something more substantial." With those final words of wisdom, Naruto left the clearing, leaving Kakashi alone with his thoughts. A new purpose. The words echoed around in the head of the Hotake. "Thank you, Naruto." He didn't know if it would work, but he knew Obito and Rin, and he knew that they would have been disgusted with how he was acting. Obito would have wanted him to be Hokage, to lead the village in his stead, to keep Konoha stable when he couldn't. Rin would have wanted him to move on, to not dwell on something that would cause him so much pain. Kakashi spent the rest of the afternoon pondering on what his friends would have wanted for him and wondering what he should do with his life. Naruto made his way to the Hokage Tower after his talk with Kakashi. He had run into the teen as soon as he entered the village after his son's wedding, and decided that it was a good time as any to talk to him like he promised Minato. Since he had talked with Kakashi, he hadn't got to see Minato since he and Kushina left the monastery over a month ago. The partially immortal man had changed back the garden when the two had left, changing the landscape until it reminded him of the garden that once was, but even so it still hadn't been the same. The entire garden had been moved and he knew it. A tree had been a bit more to the right, a bush a bit more to the left. No matter what he did, he never saw it how it once was, only a pale imitation. So he had altered the garden back again, back to the one that Kushina and Minato knew so well, back to the place that they had been married at. It didn't bother him as much as the imitation had. When Naruto finally entered the room that was his son's office, he encountered something he didn't expect. Kushina was crying in Minato's arms off to one side, her head resting on his shoulder as tears leaked from her closed eyes. His son merely held her, rubbing her back and whispering consoling words into her ear. Another person was in the room, a male, face wrinkled with age, a couple of liver spots dotting their face while wearing a white haori with a red kimono and white sash. Gray spiked hair was adorned on his head, similar to that of Kakashi but from age rather than genetics. A goatee of similar color hung of his jaw. They were sitting in a chair in front of Minato's desk, but he was turned to couple, a sad expression on his face as he looked at a crying Kushina. That changed when Naruto walked into the room, his face snapping towards him. The man's sad face gave way to narrowed eyes that quickly widened in shock before it was suppressed, and his face turned neutral. It took a few minutes for Naruto to recognize the person under all the age and wear. Hiruzen Sarutobi. There were no curse, no profanity that Naruto could use for the current situation. He had honestly hoped that he would never have had to interact with anyone that he knew from Konoha when he first came to the shinobi village. Hiruzen had obviously recognized him. After all he had done was change his eyes and hair and added a few wrinkles, not changed any of his features, though if he knew that Minato wouldn't have known anything he might have to avoid this situation. He only prayed that Hiruzen kept his mouth shut until he could talk with him. "Minato," Naruto said, turning his attention to his son, "what's wrong with Kushina?" The blonde seemed to only just realize that he was in the room, having his attention focused on comforting his wife. Tucson, Hiruzen immediately began choking. No doubt he hadn't expected that he would be Minato's father. Naruto wouldn't be surprised if he was having a mini heart attack right now. Hiruzen, are you okay? Minato asked. Yes, the Sarutobi gasped, slowly getting his breath back until he returned to normal, just choked on some air. Minato gave Hiruzen a raised eyebrow, not believing it for a second but dropped the subject anyway. The current Hokage looked back to Naruto, Kushina still leaning on his shoulder. Tucson, whether Minato heard didn't hear the small cough that came from Hiruzen, or merely didn't hear it, Naruto didn't know. Kushina just heard some distressing news. One of her family members has recently passed away. Naruto allowed a sad smile onto his features. I'm sorry, Kushina, he sent his condolences to the red head. The Uzumaki looked up to acknowledge his sympathy before burying her head back into Minato's shoulder. Would you mind if I asked to? Naruto said to Minato. It's okay, this will probably be told to the whole village tomorrow in an announcement. It won't matter if you know a few hours before anyone else, Minato told his father. Her name was Mido Uzumaki, the wife of the Shodai Hokage. She was Kushina's aunt. While outwardly, Naruto displayed sympathy while seemingly having no idea who Mido Uzumaki was, inwardly he was quite shocked. Mido was approaching middle age in Uzumaki terms, and as far as he knew was quite healthy. There should be no reason why she died so young. However, he knew that he couldn't ask how she died. Perhaps he could ask later when Kushina wasn't within earshot, but asking how someone died when there was someone grieving in the room wasn't exactly good manners. I see, Naruto said. Noting the state of Kushina, Naruto decided that it was best he gave his son and his wife some privacy. I shall leave you to comfort Kushina then, Minato. I only came here to tell you that I had returned to Konoha. I've also talked to Kakashi, but we can speak later. I'll leave you with Kushina. Thank you, Tucson, Minato replied with a small smile despite the situation, and welcome back. Naruto gave his son a smile as well before he went to leave the room. I think I'll leave you as well, Minato, Hiruzen said abruptly, standing up from his seat. Kushina needs your comfort without an audience. I'll come back tomorrow to speak with you. The Sarutobi then swiftly left the room, catching up the Minato's retreating father before the son could bid him farewell. The Sandaime Hokage quickly caught up to the dark-haired man, walking by his side as they both left the building. Naruto said nothing to Sarutobi, while the latter did nothing to initiate conversation. They both continued walking, but instead of towards their homes, it was towards the forests that surrounded the training grounds. Once they were thoroughly into the woodland area, it was only then that Naruto spoke. How did she die? There was no need to clarify who she was. She was an Uzumaki. They're meant to live for around 200 years, yet she didn't even make half that. Naruto didn't look at Hiruzen as he spoke while they both continued to walk, but he didn't need to be watching the man to be able to hear him sigh. It was a multitude of things, the professor began. Perhaps the most prominent was broken heart syndrome. She lost Hashirama, Naruto interjected. If she truly died because of broken heart syndrome, it would have happened around the time of when he died, not over 3 decades after. He still didn't look at Hiruzen as he spoke. Hiruzen sighed. She didn't just lose Hashirama, Naruto, he said, saying the man's name for the first time. She also lost her son and grandson Tobirama-sensei too. That stopped Naruto up short. He stood still for several moments, Hiruzen beside him, before he released a breath. I'm sorry, I didn't know, he apologized, but the Sandaime waved him off. It's okay, you didn't know after all. They both continued walking for a bit before Hiruzen spoke again. So Minato is your son? It was half a statement and half a question. Yes, Naruto answered shortly. I presume he doesn't know. Yes, and it will say that way until I decided to tell him. Naruto rounded on Hiruzen. You don't say a word. Hiruzen merely raised an eyebrow at Naruto's aggressive display. You'll have to try better to intimidate me, Naruto. That won't cut it anymore. When Naruto's brow furrowed and he looked ready to try again, Hiruzen quickly moved to placate. But I understand what you're trying to say. You'll tell him when you're ready. But if I may, Hiruzen asked, wanting to input his own advice for Naruto. When the man didn't move to interrupt him, Hiruzen continued. I only ask that you don't take your time. Minato won't like it that you kept such a big secret from him for too long. He will feel like you don't trust him. Naruto turned away, focusing on the forest again as began moving, Hiruzen doing the same a split second later. I'll tell him when I'm ready, Naruto said, more to himself than Hiruzen. For several moments, there was silence between the two as they moved through the forest. However, it was inevitably broken. You said Mido died from a multitude of things. What else contributed to her death? As I'm sure you know, the Sarutobi clan head began, Being an Uzumaki doesn't prevent one from sickness, though it does offer one a kind of resistance against disease. From what little Mito let slip over recent years, I believe that she was fighting some kind of illness, though I don't know what type. Another, Hiruzen paused to sigh, was because of the extraction of the Kyuubi that caused Naruto to turn to look at him sharply. We found out about it 15 or so years ago, but kept it classified. When you removed the Kyuubi from Mito, you left some of its chakra behind. Without the Kyuubi to direct its chakra to not attack its host, the chakra began to target Mito's organs slowly at first, having to fight against Mito's chakra, which managed to repel most of the damage. But it got there eventually, though the damage was significantly reduced. What harm the chakra managed to inflict was enough to lower Mito's life expectancy quite drastically. It was only then that Hiruzen noticed that he was walking alone, turning back, and he spied Naruto leaning on a tree, his hand propping him up. Backtracking towards the man, Hiruzen arrived just in time that he managed to hear Naruto's mutterings. "I didn't really do that, did I?" the genjutsu-covered man whispered to himself. At least until Hiruzen began to speak again. "No, you didn't," he said sternly. "It was the first time you had ever had to do anything like that. I wouldn't surprised if you made a mistake on the first try. Mito wouldn't want you to hate yourself like this. In fact," Hiruzen's voice suddenly turned into a low whisper, "I think Mito may have liked it this way." Naruto's eyes snapped up to Hiruzen's as the younger of the two continued. Mito had lost most of her family. Her grandson, son, and husband had both died in war. She hadn't been to Uzushio in years. Tobirama had moved on to the next life from age, and Tsunade was all grown up. All that was left was Kushina, but she was placed into Minato's safe hands. Instead of having to wait another century before she could see them, your unintentional mistake allowed Mito to move on and see Hashirama again. We both know that, by itself, the illness and broken heart syndrome wouldn't have been enough to put Mito down. When Naruto looked ready to argue, Hiruzen spoke over him. "I was there, Naruto, when Kushina announced that she was married. It was like a weight was taken off her shoulders, and I knew then that she had been holding on for her. With Kushina now taken care of, Mito was able to move on without regrets. Yes, it may be selfish of her, but no one on Earth is perfect." There was silence in the forest for several minutes as Naruto processed what Hiruzen was saying. He didn't know if what the Sarutobi was saying was true. He hadn't seen Mito in decades. Naruto thought over what he had been told, from different angles and from Mito's perspective, and could find no fault in her actions. Yes, it had been selfish, thinking that she could simply let go as she had, but she was already dying. If what Hiruzen said was true, better to die with no regrets than keep living simply for the sake of living. While Mito would leave a lot of people heartbroken at her passing, Naruto could only hope that they could move on and leave Mito whatever peace she had found. Naruto turned back to Hiruzen, who was watching the ancestor of the Uzumaki and Hyuga with focused eyes. Naruto released a sigh as he pulled himself off of the tree and back onto 2 steady feet. "Okay?" Hiruzen asked. "Yes," Naruto answered, "I think I am. I don't completely agree with her choice, but she should be allowed her own peace." "Good," Hiruzen told him. "Now, if I am allowed to move out conversation away from such topics, I was wondering if you would like an update on your former pupils," Hiruzen asked, a bit of mirth in his eyes. Naruto could feel a groan coming on. He could feel that Jiraiya had done something stupid. In an underground cave, far away from Konoha towards the north, 2 figures were stood before a large statue with multiple eyes. One of the figures was a plant-like man, half of his body white, the other black. A Venus flytrap-like extension protruded from his sides. The other figure was clad in a robe with a mask, only the right eye visible, showing a 3-tome Sharingan, marking them as a member of the Uchiha clan. "We have to alter our plans slightly," the being with dual skin tones said. "There are several things that Madara-sama did not tell you prior to his death because he believed them unnecessary. But we have found evidence to suggest otherwise. As such, the plans must be revised." "Why?" the masked man demanded. "What could be so important that we would need to revise our entire plan?" The elemental sage, the plant-like being said. The masked figure noticed that the dark half of his companion seemed to want to snarl but refrained from doing so. "He is a threat to our plan. As such, it must be altered." The human of the 2 figures scoffed. "What could he do? He would have to be almost 80 now. What threat could he pose?" The masked man, while seemingly brushed off the possible threat of the legendary figure, knew that if there was anyone who could disrupt their plans, it would be him. Even years after he had been last seen, the stories of his power still had a long time to go before they faded. Perhaps the fact that not only does he not age, but he is currently occupying a home in Konoha, the dark half of the plant being seemed to come to forefront. You do not have the power to simply shrug off a threat like him, Obito. The sound of his name caused the masked man to snarl. My name is Madara Uchiha Zetsu, you would do well to remember it. And I am the real Madara's will, Obito. Madara-sama will not like his plans to fail because of your arrogance. Zetsu seemingly sneered. Obito thought about continuing their little verbal tirade but thought better of it, it would get them nowhere. Then how do you plan to deal with it, Zetsu? Obito asked, his anger restrained for now. Zetsu seemed to realize that arguing was pointless at the same time as his companion and answered with as if the verbal exchange had never happened. The plans will have to be altered, it will take more time, but we should avoid the elemental sages. There it was again, the masked man noticed Zetsu's dark half trying to restrain a growl. Gaze, you seem to hold some hate for the elemental sage, Zetsu, Obito said lightly. Care to share? No, Zetsu replied shortly before turning on his side as he got ready to leave. Just know that he is the one true threat to our plans. With that, Zetsu turned and left, not bothering to actually say how the plan would be changed. Well, Zetsu, Obito muttered to himself as he watched the manifestation of Madara's will walk away. It appears that there is more to you than I first thought. Thanks for listening, I do hope you enjoyed it. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on the bell notification, and also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.